Thousands of years ago, celestial beings arrived in our world, being seen and worshipped as gods. They brought with them knowledge, technology, and even developed a superior race. This sounds like a science fiction synopsis, but what if I told you it was more like the Bible and Jewish literature? Would you believe it? Today we're going to explore what Marvel's epic Eternals is, and how it relates to all of this. Eternals is a Marvel movie adaptation that brings a little of this plot mentioned at the beginning. But to understand the context in which it emerged, we need to go back to the last century. The 20th century was marked by incredible archaeological discoveries, including great finds of literature from the ancient Near East, written thousands of years ago and relating the creation myths of ancient people, such as the Sumerians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. In 1948, we also had the discovery of the famous Dead Sea Scrolls, dating from the time of Jesus. These scrolls contain copies of the Hebrew Scripture, which is the Old Testament of the Bible, and several other texts from the Jewish tradition, from the period of the Babylonian exile, such as the Book of Jubilees, Enoch, and the Book of Giants. It is in this context of mystery surrounding ancient civilizations that, in the 70s, at the hands of Jack Kirby, the fascinating stories that tell, in part, the genesis of the Marvel Universe were born. Kirby was greatly inspired by this research and, mainly, by the theories in the recently released Were the Gods Astronauts, by Eric von Daniken. The book related the mysteries behind the great monuments and mythologies of the past with the actions of alien beings. In the 2000s, this even became a successful series on the History Channel called Aliens of the Past, which led to several memes due to its more conspiratorial content. Returning to Marvel Comics, the Eternals series makes mention of this, explaining how the universe would have developed through the influence of cosmic space entities that seeded life and evolved it on several planets in the most distant galaxies. We are talking about the Celestials. In Marvel, they are colossal cosmic beings, as old as the universe itself. But still, they are not the top of the pyramid, since in the comics there are entities prior to them and imbued with greater authority. Thus, the responsibility of the Celestials is to develop life forms through experiments. It's a concept very similar to what we see in the Alien franchise in the film Prometheus. The Celestials experiment and revisit their creations from time to time and, finally, decide on their final fate. Making a connection with the ancient biblical cosmology that we see in the Bible, it did not understand the expanding universe like the modern cosmology that influenced the comics. But the geocentric model, that is, with the Earth at the center, is much smaller. However, there is a possible parallel. There is still this concept of a group of celestial beings who, at some level, manage the Earth. In Hebrew scriptures, such as Psalm 82 and Psalm 89, this group is identified as the Assembly of Saints or Congregation of Saints or Divine Council, depending on the translation. Its members were not angels, but considered children of God or, in a broader category, attributed to any spiritual being in the Bible, Elohim. Of course, in the Israelite religion, there is only one sovereign creator God, but he freely delegates authority to these inferior celestial beings to collaborate in the execution of his government, as in the passage of 1 Kings 22. This passage shows God in a meeting with his heavenly council to put into practice his decree to end the reign of a king of Israel. This should not scandalize us, since God also chooses us to collaborate with him in carrying out his plans, even though he does not need any of us. Even the term Most High referring to God in the Bible places Yahweh on a unique and elevated level in relation to other celestial beings. Because, as a spiritual being, God is also an Elohim, but no other Elohim is equal to God. He has a unique nature and attributes, unlike any other. Marvel itself has a similar monotheistic concept in the little scene One Above All figure. He has very similar attributes to the Judeo-Christian God. Now, back to the comic book Celestials. Observing the development of life on our planet millions of years ago, they carried out genetic experiments that accelerated the evolution of primates, which gave rise to three races on Earth: humans, us, the Eternals, similar to us, but immortal and super powerful, who are the protagonists of this story, and the deviants, a kind of anomaly, a mistake, but still with a strength greater than that of human beings. Because they are superior in power, the Eternals were entrusted by the Celestials with the mission of supervising Earth. But it turns out that they omitted this role, which resulted in an era of tyranny by the Deviants, who dominated the planet and enslaved human beings for many years. Let's pause and think again about the Hebrew understanding of the heavenly order to see how it relates to these comic book events. As we have already seen, in the Israelite view of the hierarchy of heaven, Yahweh is the only creator God, but who shares his authority with other celestial beings who cooperate with his plans. Combined with Jewish literature from the Second Temple, 500 BC, 70 AD, the Bible narrates some of these celestial beings who should cooperate with God, but chose to follow their own goals. They are what many call fallen angels. The first group to do this are those in Genesis 6 verses 1 to 4, where it says that the sons of God had relationships with women and generated giant and powerful creatures, the Nephilim. The pseudepigraph of Enoch, that literature found in the Dead Sea Scrolls and even referenced in the New Testament, expands this story by reporting how evil and tyrants these giants were, including enslaving and devouring human beings. In the same way that the Celestials in the comics, through experiments, generated powerful creatures, the Eternals and the Deviants, the celestial beings of Genesis 6, through their incursion on Earth, also generated powerful creatures, the Nephilim, who are giants. This idea of gods and celestial beings cohabiting with human beings and generating offspring of powerful creatures, demigods, with access to elevated knowledge, is common in several civilizations. But, while other civilizations saw these giant demigods in a positive way, as even their founding myths, or as the author of Genesis 6 says, the heroes of the past, from the Israelite perspective, they are seen as evil, as rebellious as they are the celestial beings who generated them and who, by doing so, sinned against God. In other words, while the Nephilim in the Bible oppressed humans and led them to decadence, the descendants of the deities in the myths of other peoples were responsible for progress and civilizational advancement. It's as if Marvel were presenting us with two versions of a single story here. We can look at the deviants from the Israeli perspective, that is, in a negative way, and look at the Eternals from the alternative perspective of other civilizations, that is, positive. The story in the comics continues, and the deviants' tyranny over humanity becomes unsustainable. It is then that the Eternals decide to invoke the Celestials to resolve the situation. Upon hearing, the Celestials cause a huge flood that eliminates most of the deviants, and those who remain are condemned to live in the depths of the waters. Interestingly, to save humans and wildlife, Icarus, who is the leader of the Eternals, takes a giant wooden ark safely to the top of a mountain, just like the narrative of Noah and the flood in the Bible. Here we see a response from the Celestials against the terrible deviants. In the Bible, in Genesis 6 and Enoch, the flood was God's judgment on human wickedness, but also, mainly, a direct response to the threat of the Nephilim, this offspring of rebellious angels. In the comics, the Eternals resume their role as guardians of order on Earth after being warned with an almost eschatological message by the Celestials, that, if chaos were to settle in again, the planet would be completely reset and nothing would survive, not even the Eternals. With this encouraging news, the stories continue. Now, let's look at the trailers for the adaptation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and see if we can find any parallels. Right away, we see how the film strives to stay true to the historical roots that inspired Kirby, chronicling how these immortal beings influenced our history and civilization. In fact, if we look at our own history, every civilization in the ancient world had a pantheon of gods and heroes. The Bible itself also describes how Israel constantly worshipped gods from other nations. This points to the real possibility of the existence of a spiritual world as described. C.S. Lewis, famous for the Chronicles of Narnia, even stated that Christianity is a real myth. And what greater proof of the influence of these beings in the world than the coming of Jesus, described in the Bible as coming from heaven to save us? Jesus may not be the protagonist of a comic book, but he was someone who divided the history of humanity between before and after him, and who promised to return again, just like the Celestials. Finally, this film can be a beautiful and fun invitation to open ourselves to the spiritual world and, who knows, rediscover the roots of our own civilizations. If you like the content and want to help us continue, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment or suggestion about a book, film, series, anime that you want to see analyzed on the channel.